Are you an investor looking for premium market opportunities? Presenting premium and exclusive service for investors by Kalkine.
Hi, I'm James Preston for Kalkine Media and welcome to part 2 of our Cryptoqueen and OneCoin investigation. In part 1, we looked at the nature of fraudulent systems and why, as time goes on, people continue to fall for them. We also introduced Ruja Ignatova, otherwise known as the Cryptoqueen, and how she managed to swindle investors out of at least $4 billion before seemingly vanishing off the face of the earth in 2017. Now, it's been claimed that the 42-year-old Bulgarian was tipped off prior to her disappearance on October 25, 2017, after being handed a police file detailing the investigation into her $4 billion fraudulent crypto enterprise. The police documents were allegedly given to Frank Schneider, a former spy and advisor to Miss Ignatova. Schneider claims that Ignatova gave him the files on a USB stick, which he believes she obtained through her contacts in Bulgaria. The contents of these police documents contain presentations made at a March Interpol meeting called Operation Satellite, held in March 2017, 7 months prior to Ignatova's disappearance. This meeting was attended by representatives of several specialised enforcement agencies, including the FBI. The documents include details of OneCoin bank accounts receiving investor funds, as well as records of unsuccessful attempts by the UK's City of London Police to interview Miss Ignatova. Mr. Schneider is now facing extradition to the US for his alleged role in the OneCoin scam. What's disturbing about the whole debacle is how many people willingly handed over their money without knowing what OneCoin was. Much of this, though, likely had to do with Ruja Ignatova herself. In the BBC podcast The Missing Cryptoqueen, host Jamie Bartlett describes how the OneCoin community saw Ignatova as a glamorous, successful and greatly charismatic and intelligent leader of not just cryptocurrency, but also in a more general sense. Not to mention, OneCoin itself was viewed as an important movement in world history and certainly that of crypto history. One of Ignatova's strategies was to tout OneCoin as a solution to poverty in third world and developing nations. In conferences she spoke at, including one held by iconic financial publication, The Economist, Ignatova stressed the importance of education when it came to cryptocurrency, which is quite ironic considering that the success of the OneCoin racket depended largely on the ignorance of its so-called investors when it came to the workings of cryptocurrency. Beginning the scam in August 2014, it didn't take long for OneCoin to accumulate millions of euros from investors who believed they were investing in the new Bitcoin. The problem was, as it was later discovered, OneCoin didn't even have a blockchain, the underlying technology that crypto tokens are actually built on. Instead, the invested money was simply being recorded on a regular database, which, unlike a blockchain, can be tampered with and manipulated with impunity. This meant that OneCoin was not featured on any crypto exchange, which in turn meant that it could not actually be traded for anything, including any type of fiat currency. And yet the victims of the OneCoin scam believed wholeheartedly that they were making money hand over fist. But why did they think that? Well, because as far as they believed, or as they knew, the price of OneCoin kept climbing higher and higher and higher. At least that was the case on OneCoin's official website. That's right, those who had put money into OneCoin were convinced the token's value was rising at an astonishing pace because of the price that was featured on the fake token's website. In fact, the price of OneCoin wasn't based on any tokenomics or supply and demand because there wasn't any. And you guessed it, because it didn't exist. Instead, Ignatova was simply making up the price randomly and updating it periodically, making sure the value always grew. So, what can we learn from the whole OneCoin fiasco? Well, firstly, investors should always err on the side of skepticism and caution when it comes to new tokens promising the world, even if the person running it seems on the surface to have credibility. Secondly, don't put money into things you don't yet understand. All it would have taken for those swindled to realise OneCoin wasn't all it promised to be was a basic understanding of cryptocurrency and blockchain. and the fact that a crypto token can't exist without a blockchain itself. But more than that, would-be investors should look into the development team and the white paper. White paper, of course, being the engineering layout of the token and blockchain. And if nothing else, just remember that age-old adage. If something seems too good to be true, then it most probably is. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share the video. For more content, you can subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon. I'm James Preston, reporting for Kalkine Media.